So the idea came to me about 13 years ago, and it was really on the back of not seeing diverse, nuanced representation of our South Asian stories in the public domain. So I came to an idea that I would love to see a living museum of South Asian stories in a residential home that reflects the stories of migrant communities, our ancestors, the British-born South Asian experience. So you walk through a house and you get to experience the 1930s, the 1940s, the 50s, the 60s, and that was the seed about 30 years ago. 30 years down the line, I come across Coventry Art Space. They really want to support the concept of a living museum. So I transport my archive, the Stories I've Made Us archive, from my home to a studio at Coventry Art Space, and I start cataloguing, start sorting through, start finding the themes and the narratives that I want to share within the living museum context. Over a period of 4 or 5 years, working with various different partners, St Mary's Guildhall, the University of Warwick, Coventry Archives, eventually landing with the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum, we came to a project to recreate the living museum concept in an exhibition space. And this is what you've got here. Stories That Made Us, Roots, Resilience, Representation is a blueprint for a living museum in a building that happens to be in an exhibition space. This uses all my experience of theatre making, visual arts, film, music to create a theatrical, immersive experience for communities and families and friends, not only of South Asian heritage, of other communities, to find their own story. That's really important, that people find their own stories and represent them through their own archives in public spaces. I actually started collecting, I think around 79 and 1980. So I was what, 9, 10 years old. I put the TV on, mind your own language, love thy neighbour. I go to the Indian cinema, I saw Sholay, I see Nagan, I see Amar Akbar Anthony. You know, I see racism on our TV screens, and I see characters which I love, but they don't represent the British-born South Asian working class narrative. So what do I say to myself? I say, I start collecting my own stories. I don't know I'm collecting my own stories, I'm 10 years old. But what I'm doing is, every time I see a South Asian face or a brown face on television, I get the VHS tape out, record it. You know, like Easter night when the breakdancing came on, magazines, posters, leaflets, when British Asian theatre like Tara Arts, Tamasha, Kali, anything I see with brown faces, brown representation, brown narratives, I just click. And then, you know, decades later, I've accumulated this massive archive, but it's not only my archive. My mother's archive I've inherited, because she was a radio broadcaster, Jasvir Khan. So I inherited her vinyl, her cassettes, her CDs, mini discs, but also her recordings of broadcasts over, I'd say, 35 year period. And my father's archive, Hardish Virk, is in the Coventry Archives, which holds first source material for the IWA, Indian Work Association, anti-racist marches, posters, leaflets, literature. You combine all this together, it's British-born, it's migrant, it's the whole package, dude.
I was asked to come along and make a couple of films. My brother originally said, can you make 2 short films about the 70s and the 80s? The first one, The Living Room, was to be inspired by my father and his friends in the living room discussing politics and meeting the Indian Workers Association. And the second was very much influenced by him growing up as a teenager in the 80s. We both seem to go to our family for inspiration. I think even in my own work, I always look for inspiration in identity and belonging and look back to my parents' story. So with the 2 films, it was very clear to me with the 1970s that I wanted to recreate something and get actors on board, because we had some footage but not quite enough. So it was important to recreate the 70s living room. And then I made a call out for actors and actresses who were Coventry based, and which actually all of them are, apart from the female actress. And I just did an open call, so it was for anybody. And then got them to grow their sideburns, keep their tashes, and look a bit 70s.
It's really interesting. So the way in which we approached this was this: a family story, my family story, at the heart of this exhibition. So you humanize it, you personalize it. So when people come in, they step into somebody else's life, but they find their own life through the family story. But it's framed in this timeline, in this 425-year timeline of the relationship between the South Asian subcontinent and the British Isles, and a generic timeline, historical timeline, and the Virk family timeline. So that is the framing in which this personal archive sits, and this personal story. But also there's loads of themes that resonate with all communities, irrespective if you're South Asian or not. Like growing up as a teenager in the 1980s. That could be anybody's bedroom. That living room could be anybody's bedroom growing up in the 1970s. The television sets, the clock, the decanter set, the whiskey, the posters, the vinyl.
There is a bloodline that goes on, and everyone has it as a migrant. Everyone has it anyway, regardless of whether you were born in the same country. So you are connected to your past, and I wanted to look at that with the actors as well and get them to kind of acknowledge who they are and what this story might mean for them. I was also very interested in using my mum and dad's voice, because my dad was a poet, my mum was a poet and writer, so it was very important to have their voice in there. And Hardish had also asked me and my sister to record any memories that we had of that time, which we did note down. And there was a point where I thought, I'll get us to record them. But then I actually got my children to record the voices, because when we would have been in that house in the 70s, the terraced house, we would have been kids about that age.
There's a particular story that actually is different to the rest of it. It's my mother's story in the radio station. That's a uniquely her story. That is a story you can't find anywhere else. Her voice is in that part of the exhibition. Her narrative's in there, her poetry's in there, her prose is in there. But it's also symbolic of the South Asian women who are literally the backbone of the family, of the community, the South Asian community, often overlooked, silenced, invisible. So I think she's also symbolic as well.
So I had pictures from my parents and my dad during the 70s, and there were quite a few which I've used as templates, where there was a stance, there was a way that they would stand, and there was a real dignity, and they would always wear, I'm actually wearing a suit in honour of them, they would always turn out quite dignified with their suits and jackets, and I wanted to recreate that with the actors, but so you get a sense of that world. So The Living Years is the 1970s film, which is also called 31 St George's Road, but I didn't want to say the address of where we lived, but it's okay now, it's everywhere. And the second film is called The Teenage Years, and that is now my 10th short film. So the first ever film I made was about my mum. It was made on a tiny little digital camera, and I followed my mum at the radio station and interviewed her and her colleagues. and just cut it myself with a bit of music, but it was the beginning of filmmaking. We grew up in quite a unique, creative Asian family, which wasn't really the case growing up in the 80s. For our family to be artists wasn't the norm. If anything, it was seen as something that was wrong with us. But my parents were never cowed by that. They continued to practice arts, and they continued to allow us to form careers in this profession if we wanted to. We didn't know how, they didn't quite know how. I feel there is always a way, and I suppose with this exhibition, maybe people might come away thinking that there is possibilities, that it's not always being in front of the screen, it's how to tell the stories, how to take ownership behind the scenes. I do feel like there are a lot more role models, but I also feel like there is still fear of fully being yourself. There is always a compromise to fit in. So I think it's kind of knowing who you are and trying to lean into that and seeing it as a strength rather than a weakness.
I come from a dynamic theatre making background. One of the first theatre shows I put on in the early 90s, I used a DJ live on stage with contemporary dance with a set design, and we had pre-recorded music and a film playing. I've always believed in bringing different art forms and mediums together to create this really dynamic experience. So I want to recreate everything I do. Like my previous exhibitions, I had a sound system, I had monologues, I had music playing. So I always believe that we can bring different art forms together to create this very dynamic experience. Personally, I don't want to do a static exhibition. It has to be theatrical, it has to be dynamic, it has to be exciting. If you feel excited, then the story that you're trying to tell will come through a lot more effectively.
For me to contribute to the South Asian stories, especially in a powerful way where you're looking at their strength and representation as opposed to, I suppose, being victimised, or to look at them through the lens of power, is really important, because the South Asian communities have contributed so much, and a lot of my own storytelling tries to look at the impact of my communities and our communities and how they have shaped society for better. But I do feel like there are a lot of stories that are not heard, and I feel like they should really be nurtured, that we should continue to nurture the past and the present and the future voices.
To say we didn't arrive in England or Coventry in the 1940s or the 50s or the 60s. We've been around since the 1600s as Lascars, as ayers, but also as politicians, as academics, as scientists, as cultural motivators and activists. We've been here for hundreds of years, pretty much designing every fabric of British life. So I'm trying to tell a whole new generation, a younger generation, that your ancestry and your history in this country is locked down. We've been around for a long time. Own it. Own your history here and own your belonging here. You belong here, because without your ancestors, there will be no Great Britain. We made this country, you know what I'm saying? We made this country because East India Company went after India and took our resources and our riches and they brought them over here. So what's really interesting is working with an institution and an archives collection, an institutionalized gallery, museum space and archives, is that they have a particular way of working and interpreting work. And then I'm coming in with my vision, and I'm coming from the front line. And we're marrying institution with personal archives and from the front line. And because I've worked with institutions for decades, I know how to have these conversations. So I know how to have these sort of conversations with middle management and as well as senior management, but I also have to ensure that I'm being listened to, I'm not being silenced. So to me, it's about telling stories using archival objects with the right language, with the right stories, messages, that nothing's diluted, nothing's silenced, but it's a collaboration nevertheless. It has to be a collaboration. You don't come in prescribing, you work collaboratively because they also bring a lot to the table. They bring skills, they bring experience, they bring expertise. So you come together as a team, and I have worked with some of the best people you work with in putting this exhibition together, absolutely.
The films are crucial to the whole experience. For me, they're not separate to everything that takes place. They're interwoven, and anyone visiting, I hope, gets a sense of pride if they're from that community. But I also hope that a lot of people from all backgrounds come, because I feel at this moment in time we need more unity than division. And if someone from any background can relate, that's a plus, because we all have unique stories. Every single family has a unique story. And if they can connect to our story, then they can find a way to connect to others who they think they might not have anything in common with.
Digital, we are creating digital platforms for it, so people who don't live in Coventry can't get to Coventry, see it. Toronto, Vancouver, we're up near, we're based around the world, our diasporic communities. But also, the future of this is, how does this temporary exhibition, which finishes in May, has a permanent life? But also the Living Museum of South Asian Stories. How do I reposition this exhibition in a living museum of South Asian stories, a building-based exhibition? That's the next stage. It's a bigger project. But also collaborations, people to find their own stories and work with institutions to, tell their own stories. This is not about me. This is about everybody else, man. Share the love. Yeah. Nobody's got a monopoly over telling our stories. No way, man.
DESIblitz.com